Our second panel discussion, City as Stage, Rethinking Mumbai's Cultural Infrastructure. Please join me in welcoming Consultant Chairman's Office, NCPA, Albert Almeida, Artistic and Cultural Curator, Srila Chatterjee, Fine Artist and Honorary Chairperson, Kalagoda Association, Brinda Miller, Founder and CEO, Q Collective and Executive Committee Member, ULI India, Mr. Vivek Narayan. Founder and Chairperson, Avid Learning, Mrs. Madhu Ruya. Co-founder, Harkat Studios, Michela Talwar. And the moderator for this session, Managing Director, Teamwork Arts and Co-Chair, FICCI Creative Industries Committee, Sanjoy Roy.
Thank you so much for that previous panel, Asad and everybody. That was truly in terms of how do you make museums respond to the public? Why is it that audiences are important? And why is it that we have to do things for communities? Pretty much what we talked about at the beginning of today's session. I have with me some amazing people who come from different fields, and that's the reason we brought them together. So I'm going to start, Brinda, the Kala Ghoda Festival, and something that you've helmed for so many years now, it really provides an opportunity, not just for the fancy elite of Bombay to come into fancy elite places, but it allows the community there, whether it's the parking attendant or the policeman, or I remember once you told me the bhel seller, etc., all to become part of this larger area called Kala Ghoda. So two quick thoughts. One is, tell us a little bit about why this festival became so important for Kala Ghoda, and how is it sort of inspired other spaces, other heritage spaces to re-look at itself? And two, how do you look at community? What do you have to do in terms of programming to bring together community?
So in a nutshell, Sanjoy, I would say that the Kala Ghoda Arts Festival was started 27 years ago, which is a long time. And it has kind of, every year we thought that we won't be able to do it next year because of funding or whatever. It's a free festival. So somehow it has survived, and I think it has some good luck or something, good energy and good vastu, call it what you like. So it was started actually to restore the old buildings in the area. Some of the money that we made went into that, made from the sponsorship of the festival. So it became the tail that wags the dog. That's my usual joke. It was not the main reason why we started the festival. It was not for the festival, but because of this awareness that we had to create. Yes, it's true. Earlier, in fact, we had a lot of, elite people who started it. And then it became, gradually it became middle class to all the other classes. And then now finally, I would say that we've achieved that goal of including everyone. Everyone wants to be there. Yes, there was a bhelwala and there was all of that in the beginning, but now things are slightly different. We've kind of organized it differently. We've had lots of issues, lots of plus, minus issues, but somehow we've survived, and here we are. It's easily the most, one of the most popular festivals in India, probably one of the largest in Asia, and number of people that come, almost 2 million. That's a very big amount of people. Lots of people come. And they say, why don't you charge? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? But we don't want to charge anyone because we want everyone to come to this festival and enjoy it.
And how has it changed the place? How has Kala Ghoda as an area changed because of the festival and the awareness?
So it has become a tourist destination. It has become the destination. It's the only festival in Mumbai of its kind, in Maharashtra actually. You do have a lot of literature festivals, and you do have a lot of music festivals. You do have a lot of other kinds of festivals, but there is no such festival where there's everything. There is dance, music, theater, and workshops, and children's workshops, and all of that put together in one place over 9 days.
Srila, in many ways, you're the content creator for all of these festivals that go on across the world and non-festivals, all the way from Blue Frog in your earlier days and advertising and music to everything that you're doing with craft today. And you were talking about the Bukhara experience, but we'll come to that later. Tell me a little bit about what is the role that craft and art plays today in the creative economy, and how have you been able to make the design intervention create a new value system?
You know, for me, craft is fundamentally the most basic industry, social factor, everything in India. This country.
And just toss your hair and show them your earring.
Okay. I am the craft. Anyway. So, I mean, craft really is the basis of everything in this country, and unfortunately has been treated as just, no big deal for too long. And trying to just change the conversation to where it's recognized as this is not something that should work with design or with art. It is design and art is very different. And why it makes a big difference is because when you're talking about craft, you're talking at every level. You're talking from some of the greatest architects that are in the country and are working at cutting edge kind of solutions to design, which is also craft. And you're talking about somebody who's working with their hands, maybe in a remote village, making something with straw or with grain or with anything. And when all of those are given the same kind of respect, and you start looking for ways in which to use those as solutions, you shift everything. You shift the social consciousness, you shift the economics. People start being able to live by their craft if you respect it. And what we've been trying to do is to just do that, is to make craft something that you look at the same way you look at art when you walk into a gallery, or design when you walk into some great museum. And when that happens, everything changes. And it's exciting. It's also beautiful.
Srila, how do we create value for the craftsperson? We've seen, say, the earlier stories where China was dumping Banarasi silk saris and completely wiping out the Banarasi weavers and their economy. We saw during COVID how the entire gig in the crafts economy just fell apart because they didn't have a platform to sell except in this physical space. And nobody values the fact that it takes 1 million times of doing something to build muscle memory and that whole lineage that you receive. What do we need to do to create value for the craftsperson?
It all starts with stories. It's getting those stories out for people to know, because it's only when you know that the reason why something that's come out of a machine that looks fantastic is so different from what this is, because it's taken somebody all these generations to learn how to do it, and why it's special. You can see the difference storytelling makes when you're talking to someone. They start appreciating. That's the same with art. You look at it and say, oh, what's the big deal? And then the artist starts giving you, or somebody gives you an idea of what they were thinking, and it changes your head. So if you're changing people's heads, they also accept that I can't just get everything that's quick, easy, and cheap. So it's really about that.
Storytelling, quick, easy, and cheap. Mishala, tell us, you've been working in this whole storytelling, trying to create, again, platforms for storytelling through all of these products. Tell us again, why is that important, and how do we connect communities through storytelling, craft, and everything else that you've been doing with Harkat?
I mean, yeah, storytelling actually comes often as an afterthought because it comes so natural to us. And then when we are in conversations like this, we end up thinking about the fact that we are all storytellers. But when you're doing it, you're just doing it. And I think that's where we started with Harkat. So we do a couple of different things. Harkat is a performance space. It's also a design and art studio. We work with celluloid film, which is, again, generations that it took to figure out how that works, and which is something that we try to value with our work, that we go back into what is film actually, how does color actually come onto the camera, how is an image made. If you look at your iPhone nowadays, the magic is completely gone, and we deconstruct that. And the same is with the performance space. We are not a prosimium space, it's a small black box. It actually started as a living room space where we just put up performances with the performers that lived around the area, and hence it became a community space. Interestingly, talking about storytelling then, is that it became its own art form, I would say, in a way, to perform in living room spaces. So after maybe a year or so of existing, playwrights started to write plays especially for these kind of spaces, where people would sit like across on a table, and then maybe the actor would come from the side of the room and interact with the audience. And that was a very new way of writing plays compared to proscenium. So I think the space informs the art, and then hopefully we'll find new ways of storytelling. And yeah, that's the basis of it.
Albert, storytelling, one extreme of in terms of space, which is much more community black box, and then you have NCPA, the formidable, the most amazing space that Bombay has or had. Is there a value today for places like the NCPA? What is its larger purpose, and what do you need to do to again connect with community, be able to inspire people to create work there? Is the time for the NCPAs over, or are we on a threshold where we will again look at amazing work coming into places like the NCPA?
I think we should all be proud of an institution like the NCPA. I think when Dr. Bhabha approached JRD in those days to say, let's set up the NCPA, I think one of his first comments or justification to the rest of his colleagues at the Tata House was to say, at that time Tata was only known for steel, and he said one day we'll be remembered more for this than the steel we make. And I think that is the history that he's created, and left a huge legacy thanks to likes of Bhabha, who gave his entire estate to run the NCPA. But coming to being the space which encourages or welcomes art forms, etc. I know there is a kind of an impression or a perception that we're desperately trying to correct every day, that this is an elitist, sobo, snobbish institute. It is not. I think we do a lot of stuff which is absolutely free. We try and welcome people. I think one of the accusations is that my colleague Bruce, why do you need a Scottish man to run theatre in India?
Why?
So, but I must tell you that accusation. He's the guy who first brought back the Marathi festival into the NCPA, then brought back the Gujarati festival, and today people don't really realize that we program more regional theatre than we do English or Hindi. So I think there's a lot to be done by way of changing perceptions. Even in the collaborative space, I think there's a lot that the NCPA does to collaborate. And so if you look at what we were set up to do was not just presentation, which everybody knows us for. We present genuinely good stuff, but it was also preservation of our rich Indian art forms and stuff, and then the propagation of that. So I think a lot of that work doesn't get celebrated, but there's a lot happening thanks to...
But you've also been working in education. Look at the music program that you have. More and more the SOI, the Symphony Orchestra of India, is bringing in young talent which is Indian as opposed to not Indian.
Yeah, so I think when Mr. Santuk had this dream to set up an orchestra, I think a lot of people ridiculed him. Even today, I think we're on a journey. We've not completed our journey yet because we've been able to scale only 25% of the orchestra who are Indian. And we still lean on 75% international talent. But the Symphony Orchestra of India's Academy has now, in fact, in its, I think, 10th or 11th year, we've had 2 batches of graduates who've gone, and I'm happy to say that 5 of them have gone to do further education in music in Europe and the US. So I think that's a big progress that we've made. And we run programs even for professional musicians, thanks to the support of Citibank, where we actually give musicians who are talented a stipend, a salary, and a professional fee, so they don't have to really do, other jobs to be an orchestral player. So I think we're still on that journey, but we will have 100% Indian symphony orchestra very soon.
Madhu, we're sitting in SR's corporate headquarters, and every time I come into your building, the guard outside said, "Sir, hum aapko pehchante hai," kind of stuff, and thank you for coming in. And I keep thinking, how is it that a corporate headquarter like this can also be a welcoming space and a multi-purpose space, including the arts? Is this something that, as a vision, you began, or is this a corporate identity that SR decided to look at?
Very good question. Thank you, Sanjoy. My husband, when I was like 50 years old, I wanted to do something for myself. And I said, can you support me? Can you guide me? And he said, yes, start something which is in learning. And the children were studying in New York, and I did several continuous learning courses in New York. And that's when the idea came to start Avid Learning, a continuous learning platform. I thought it'll be a place where people can learn, explore, and be, inspired by it. But I'm so happy to see it has grown to much larger context.
For those of you who don't know, Vivek has set up something called Quorum. There's a Quorum in Delhi, Hyderabad, here in Bombay, and I think many other places he'll tell us about. Vivek, again, in this creating multi-purpose spaces, as you've done in most of the cities, it's really become a junction for corporate, the art world, the design world, and the craft world to come together in the form of a club. What got you thinking that this was something that would work?
I don't think I was thinking. But thanks, Sanjoy, for... we started our journey about 8-10 years ago, and I think there was a tipping point. And we started in Gurgaon that, has no cultural infrastructure at all. So we said, let's start this contemporary version of the club, which is hospitality-centered, and you build a community. And then we didn't have the sprawling acres to build, Wellington-type sports facilities. So we use 2 anchors to build the community, and programming and culture was one of them. And then wellness and well-being was the other one of them. And we were ourselves surprised of how much demand there was. I think there's a lot of cultural content. There's so many stories to be told. I think there's a lot of sort of demand for it. I think there was just lack of platforms that bring it together. So I think that was the genesis. And since then, one's been sort of peeling the onion on this and doing a lot more stuff on adaptive reuse of spaces to make them not only for the consumption of culture, but to make them multifunctional, because at the end of the day, you've got to get the economics right as well. And I think that's where, we're trying to find the balances. How do you create spaces out of places that you would not normally expect and use them for celebrations, corporate events, as well as the consumption of culture? And on the latter, because that's what we're talking about, you've got great distribution today. Albert's erstwhile organization, BookMyShow, is an example of that. So you've got content, you've got distribution, you've got demand, but I think the venues are, we're supply side constraint in India, and we will continue to be for a while. So we found a little gap that makes economic sense, and that's kind of what we're trying to do. So.
In many ways, Quorum, say in Bombay or in Gurgaon, or I don't know, I've never been to the Hyderabad one, is very much located in corporate India. Is there a need and a demand for that community to engage with the arts? And if so, how do you do that? How do you bring them into this idea of the arts in a way that's accessible for them?
So I've struggled with that corporate India sort of tag. I think everyone's inherently got creative sort of talent in them. And so...
I mean, the built infrastructure in which you're in is...
So that's a different question. So what we've realized is that there's actually... I'm also part of something called the Urban Land Institute, Sanjoy, which you're aware of. And this Urban Land Institute is a non-for-profit, membership-driven, and we invite everyone to be a part of it, actually, that it brings together people in the built environment to make our urban environments better. And it's got some of the top developers, architects, everyone who has a vested interest in the built environment come together. And one of the things that we learned is that placemaking and creating sense of place, I think there's an economic model around that, and a lot of developers around the world now have used that smartly to bring culture into their infrastructure to make it more valuable as well. So it's not only about doing a service, but also making it make sense. So I think I have to give credit to Blackstone, who we partner with. They kind of told us, hey, why don't you do something interesting in our space? And we took we took these corporate buildings and we said, listen, how do you bring art and culture into these corporate buildings and multi-use this infrastructure? And if you haven't been, we've just opened a place called The Pavilion, and we took a lobby of an office building that had 11-meter heights, and we made a TED-style auditorium out of it. So we used dead space, and we made like a contemporary, functional, great technology. And again, but we made sure that we'd use it with the intent of having multi-use. So it's it gets used for a whole bunch of stuff now. So how do you create dead spaces, and how do you create more space? Because we're just short of space in general. I think this is the opportunity we've seen and we've been tapping into.
Srila, short of space in general, but we're seeing that, there's, again, so much of creativity in every community today in Bombay. And in Bombay, communities are still communities in the way that they function. What do we need to do to be able to leverage that much more? What is it that we can do to be able to create a space for innovation, ideas, and creativity in these community spaces?
Well, I can give you an example of the community I'm working with in Khotachiwari, where we have a gallery. You go in there, and the first thing that you have to do is belong. And if you go in there looking to gentrify something and make a really swish place because it's very cool, you've killed the whole idea of community. So we think of any ways we can have people. I mean, they're not necessarily people who are going to show in terms of design or craft, but they cook, so you'll have their food. When you're doing some catering, you'll have dinners. At Christmas time, because it's a big Christmas kind of area, there's a festival on the streets. We encourage everyone to come in. So the minute the community gets involved, they think of ways of things they want to do that they ask you to support. And slowly, from being an outsider, you become an insider, and you get involved in things like there's a clubhouse that is wasted. What can we do? How can we use it? How can other people in the community therefore use it? So I think in every community, it's the little things. It's like that whole proverbial little drops of rain. You start like that. Everything in Bombay is a small community. And everybody's always interested in something, whether it's a carom championship, or it's, I try to ensure that you get past anything that's religious, because then that goes into a completely different zone, and there's enough of that. But getting everybody together and being almost like you're outside of it all, you become like an insider. And I think that makes people then think of other ways you can use their spaces, other things that you can do, that even you may not have thought of.
Srila, you're talking about moving or navigating around the whole religious space thing. Today, Durga Puja, for example, in Calcutta is more than this Durga Puja. It's really the biggest installation art space in the world, where every street corner has an installation, and I'm calling it an installation, which is thematic, which is environmentally friendly. So Ganesh Chaturthi here in Maharashtra pretty much celebrates the same, but in a slightly different way. Is there a potential, or is there an avenue that you can tweak that to become what Durga Puja has become in Bengal?
I'm from Calcutta, and I'm going to say first you have to be Bengali and artistic. But of course there is, but I think Durga Puja is it has many years on that.
It's very secular as well.
It's very secular. It's not a religious thing, and it's also in a city that doesn't have much else to show. So this becomes the focus of everything. I mean, I read recently that there's a 10,000 crore inversion of money into the economy because of Durga Puja.
33,000.
Okay, 33,000 crore, which is huge. Yeah. But it's-
4.7% of Bengal's economy comes from Durga Puja.
I don't know whether it needs to be replicated because there are so many really stupid and small reasons that you have to be in Bengal and Calcutta to understand why they may not be a good thing to replicate. But it gives it gives you that fantastic Durga Puja anyway. But I do think that if there was, you know, that I, as an outsider, I mean, I lived in Bombay many years, but I still feel like I came into this city. I find the whole Ganesh festival thing much more political, and it becomes almost threatening if you don't become part of it. So you have to navigate that very carefully.
But can it become a design space?
Of course
as
it
well?
can. Anything can become a design thing. Anything at all. Anything can become the center around which you build a whole festival that would have music and theater and arts and just anything, food, the works. And I've seen that happen even in Kotachivari. There's Christmas, but there's also, you know, at Ganesh Utsav, there's what's fantastic is the community coming out there and cooking, and there's food that you can buy on the streets that's delicious. And they understand that everybody may not be into wanting to be at the actual religious part of it, but everybody wants to eat that. You know, so it all works. There's always something for everybody if you make it interesting.
Albert, whether it's Calcutta or Maharashtra or Bombay, where you do the street corner Ganesh Chaturthi, is there an argument that spaces like, or institutions, and NCPA is an institution, has a responsibility today to move out of NCPA and create smaller NCPAs, yes, across the country, but also across different places in Bombay? Because in Bombay, you know, Andheri could well be Venus, given that South Bombay is Mars. You know, it is different spaces. And what is it that you folks have been doing? I know Bruce and you and NCP have been doing NCP in the Park, for example, where you take culture out. Is there an argument to do much more, make them very much local? And then is there a reason why you should look at built infrastructure or repurposed infrastructure, so NCP is in each of these places?
Yeah, so we often have this discussion, but I think it's people and resources that always come in the way. And the thing is, first, we'd like to run the best possible show at the NCPA, given the fact that we have 5 theaters there, 365 days a year. We're like kind of trying to grow programming there, encourage people to come in on weekdays. We're trying new formats of programming, like even stand-up comedy or you know, like open mic and stuff like that, where the younger crowds come in. We're trying to build a whole school cohort to say, can we infect young kids with an experience of half a day? So we're trying to create a half-day package, which is like a, you know, like a day out at the theater for them, where we do different things. But yes, NCP at the Park, which is today launching the 5th season at Nadli Bagh, was something that started actually, it was triggered by COVID because nobody was coming to the theaters. And Mrs. Ashwini Bide said that COVID's over. So we said, well, nobody believes that. So can we do this thing at the park? And she said, yes, please do this at the Cooperage. Let's call people. I'll come and address them and tell them that COVID is officially behind us and now there's no social distancing. And that actually triggered our outreach to the city to say, come back to culture, come back to community shared experiences, and maybe come back to the NCPA. But more than that, it then went on to become such a thing where the next municipal commissioner, Bhushan Gagrani, came and said, why are we doing it only one weekend in a, you know, in this place, that place? Let's make it a 20 shows, 5 months of the year, 4 months of the year, which are good climate months. And we said we need the resource. Fortunately, we had support of West Side, but this year we're struggling for support to take it for 4 months, but we're going to start with 6 weeks from today. Similarly, we keep having ideas. The chairman says, you know, like the museum has a museum on wheels, and I think one of the speakers in the earlier session spoke about why don't you have 2,000 such museums on wheels, taking, and the chairman often feels that we should have an NCP on a bus where you equip it and you just take the bus and you like take art, culture to different parts of the city. So we do have these conversations. We do try and raise resource, and whenever we find something, we're happy to take it. So NCPA the park.
But is it a resource issue? Is it a policy issue? Is it an intent issue?
There's nothing. There's no policy that's keeping us back. We've taken NCPA the park to Delhi last month. We're going to Bangalore in a few days, which is next Sunday. So I think we're doing our bit, but we're not doing enough, I think.
And you're talking about the economics. Tell us a little bit. I mean, Srila talked about Khana being the sort of great democratizer and one way in terms of to build it. In most places across the world, and the film theaters in India, 45 to 60% of their economics comes from Khana Pina. Is that something that you're looking at? What does your bar contribute to NCPA? Do you have a bar?
We don't. So
what's the point? No gin and tonic when you go to see.
So
I mean, how will anybody enjoy a play?
Exactly.
I mean, come on.
Exactly. Content feels better after a couple of drinks.
Yeah, but how do you manage just in terms of dimes and dollars if you don't have a bar, if you don't have much more food?
So that's exactly what we're struggling with at the moment. And unfortunately, we got stuck in a bit of a rut because we were set up as a not-for-profit to make the arts accessible. The same people will pay 50,000 quid to listen to Shakti from the balcony of a dome. But if we charge them 10,000 bucks, everybody's like screaming from the rooftops that, oh my God, you guys are charging so much. Similarly with our F&B, we've got literally a canteen running there, but if he takes his chutney sandwich prices up by 10 bucks, their chairman gets a barrage of letters, the coffee can't be, so we've got those challenges. But point taken, currently the way the economics stack up is that we just get less than a third of our money coming from box office. Like I said, fortunately, Mr. Bhabha left his entire estate to us. That gives us, I would say, another quarter. And the rest of it comes from, renting our spaces when we're not doing our own shows. And we make a little bit from our food and beverage, which is not adequate, I would agree. And then like we said, we go cup our hands and we say, please support the arts. And
so, Brinda, what do we need to do to stop this cup, take your, whatever's called, what's it, pallu or jhola or whatever, and say, please give us money? Why can't we become far more resilient? Is it because we look at the arts as this holy cow kind of thing? Oh, no booze. Oh, no food. Oh, no whatever. Why can't we change that? What do you get out of Khana Pina in Kala Ghoda?
So first of all, there are a lot of bars in Kala Ghoda area, fortunately.
But not contributing to the festival, not contributing to you.
They're not contributing, but they're definitely helping. Yes, we do have a liquor sponsor this year. So believe it or not. Earlier, we used to think it's taboo, but they did come and they said, can we do this, can we do that? There are some restrictions because of the government, because of the policies, but otherwise, we are trying to work around it and it is happening. So, and I'm very open to it. I wouldn't have a...
And the economics in general of Kala Ghoda, how are you managing that?
Getting healthier, much healthier. But of course, I would like more money. Always a struggle. It is a struggle because we have to go and beg for it. And
new ways of making money? Are there new ways apart from begging?
No, there are no new ways because we are not going to, like as I said, there's going to be no tickets being sold there, and we don't.
So Sudhir, is there a thing that we should look at running a marketing course for people like us who are always begging? Is there a value add there? No, as an investor, is there a value add there that you run a program for professional beggars as to how to beg? Seriously.
Yeah, I think for me, CSR has always been cash surplus responsibility.
Yeah.
Now the question is...
To the Prime Minister's fund.
No, it's not about the Prime Minister's fund. At the end of the day, I think all of us are now discussing that last word, economy, and you're bringing it up. But often we get caught just up to creative, right? So how do you get these two together? And whether it's a course that helps that sort of bridge happen. And it's important. I think it's important. The economy guys are not creative enough and the creative is not economic enough. And I think so whether there's a course or one of the earlier panelists talked about humility is required of the other, right? that you don't frown upon somebody who is commercial in nature, and you don't frown upon either on somebody who's creative enough, right? So we need to coexist. And yeah, absolutely courses are required. I can only tell you, even in a pure economic activity, I'm in venture capital, there is a continuous process to explain to a technologist, a scientist, an engineer, that there's economics. When we use the word STEM, it sort of almost ends at science, technology, engineering, and medicine. You have to continue with math and money.
And innovation.
And it doesn't come. It just doesn't come. So if you ask a guy that you're a chartered accountant, first of all, we are totally frowned upon as this low creative guys, not relevant at all. So I think it's important to keep thinking about this as a conjoint rather than separate.
So given that today the creative economy is seen to be the sunrise sector, why don't people like you at Silex invest some of your venture capital into the creative innovation sector?
There is absolutely lots of people working on investing only in the creative economy. If you said gaming is creative economy,
It is.
It's happening. If you say the creator has now become truly democratic, it wouldn't have happened without that. If you say the notion of the App Store, where there's so much creative flow, like in and out. If you talk about YouTube, these didn't exist, right, 20 years ago? I would say billions of dollars have backed creativity, design, aesthetic, and it is now pretty much, I don't think the economy works without the creative, and all of us from the so-called bad world called the economic world, we cannot function without the creative component as a very severe part of it. Like when we build teams today in companies, we want to see whether you've got the right brain sitting inside or not. Because if it's not there in the team, you're not going to get a great product. Whether it's an industrial product, whether it's robotics, anything, I can tell you that there is zero doubt in my mind those two work together.
I'll come back to BIC. Varun, the economics of it, this has really become important. Even 10 or 12 years ago, I remember when Airtel came to us to say, Walmart, they were building Walmart, they wanted to do, an art space, and then they said, no, there's no value in this art space at all because we won't realize the commercial value of a mall rental space as opposed to a workspace. Today, every mall rental person or every builder of malls are realizing that the mall as it was designed is dead. And they need to make it creative. And they need to have anchor restaurants, food outlets, booze outlets, and most importantly, creative spaces. Tell us.
I just want to pick up what Albert was saying about the F&B being such a small part of his revenue pie. I think that's changing, and I think some of the new folks that are building stuff that are more contemporary are focusing on building that infrastructure. And I think we're at this inflection point where consumers also consuming culture, consuming the experience economy, will pay for that. We do it all over the world. I mean, you go to, I'll give you a bad example of a sporting event of the World Cup in India, and I think people paid $1.5 lakh for the tickets, and I think you got dhokla, but I'm saying it was a missed opportunity, right? Now, okay, it was Gujarat, and maybe there was a restriction for the alcohol and the hospitality, but I think this is a big opportunity. I think it has to be thought through first principles basis, build the right infrastructure, and I think in the right contemporary setting, we're at a tipping point where people will spend more to consume that. So, but it's still at the early days of that.
Can I just say something to that?
Yeah.
I completely agree, but what you've got to understand is one of the biggest struggles in India is between a whole new world that can pay $1.5 lakh for a ticket to cricket, and a whole world who can't, or who've been to the NCPA for the last 50 years and can't understand why something that used to cost 500 rupees should cost 5,000 rupees. I mean, if you go to any of the old clubs anywhere in India and you take a drink cup by 50 paisa, it becomes almost like you're committing harakiri. And it comes from, and one part of me thinks, it's really disgusting. How can you do that? But there's a part of me that thinks, thank God. because you cannot have the whole country built only for the rich people who come out of hedge funds. I mean, there's a whole world out there that really works hard for what they're earning, and they cannot do that. They cannot go to these. So we're fighting all these things, but the biggest fight is not that. The biggest fight is that you do not get any help from the infrastructure that you should get help from, which is public institutions. You don't get government spaces. There are so many spaces in Bombay that you could use and say, just give it to me free, I'll fix whatever. I'll fix the lighting, I'll fix it. You won't get them. If you get them, there'll be a million restrictions where they'll come to stop you. So that is the real problem. I mean, I think finding funds and finding what to do is secondary. Space is at a premium in this city. You don't get it anywhere. Yeah, and I mean, I know about this city, but I imagine everywhere. So that's what you need. You need a government to do something.
Sanjay, talking about this food and beverage and everything, I'll just give you the example of something that happened literally a week back. There was a small promoter in Bandra who did this thing called Oli Fest, where he had 3 days of music with good acts. So obviously to make ends meet, he was not ticketing it very high. He brought in different food, beverage, alcohol, etc., etc. And the very next day, because we're getting into a municipal election, the government gets banged by the opposition, the Uddhav Thackeray and the Congress, saying that, oh, you've served liquor near a heritage precinct and you've allowed this performance, blah, blah, blah. So we were supposed to launch our park event there today, but we were told, don't even bother going there till this dies down. So those are the kind of challenges we face. Talking about alcohol at the NCPA, the license is prohibitive. I try to convince the excise guys and the Mitra, what do we call it? We have a CEO of something called Mitra, which is supposed to be a transformation of Maharashtra. And I said, why can't you give us a venue license? Because I have shows in different things. No, you have to take a license here and you take a license there. And even if it's a space like this, 2 bar counters, you take a separate license for that and separate license for that. So it just makes it a zero-sum game.
Sanjay, if I may speak here, contrary to what is being said here, the Versova fishing community, they have transformed that whole fishing village into an art and culture space by the Koli community. So how have they done that? It's their own initiative. They didn't get any money from the government, but they have made a huge creative space and, inspired people to come there to buy their local stuff and, enjoy all the culture.
Michelle, do people in the arts have to be crazy to be able to do what we do? What's the thing? Is it crazy? Is it foolhardiness? Is it genius? I mean, to be able to navigate, like he's saying, no permission or to move out of the ordinary, what do you need? What do you have? Are you eccentric?
I think what I feel in this group is a lot of overthinking. I think that's how we operate. I don't know how I am, but we just do. And I think it's very funny. We are in Versova. Maybe it's the Versova vibe, that we operate pretty much like the Koli fishing community. We just do. It's also, I think we find great value in the fact that everything is so fickle and can go any moment. Our space is in Aramnagar, which is de facto illegal. Everything is illegal in Aramnagar. It's a fact. And the BMC can come in any day, and just break it down. And they are completely right, actually, because all of these bungalows are supposed to be refugee bungalows that have 1 floor and a front yard. And if you go into Aramnagar, you will find exactly 3 buildings that look like that. And everything else is 3 stories high by now. It's actually architecturally, I find Aramnagar quite interesting now because you can see that there's a certain kind of architecture that has established itself. And it's all of these staircases outside and basically just a concrete block, which takes 2 weeks to build and another concrete block. So you can get a whole bungalow in 4 weeks. And all of them look like that. It's its own architecture. It's interesting. But so basically, I think that the volatility of that life gives us energy, so we just do what we feel like doing. Like you live the day and you don't know what's tomorrow, and so you just do it and you don't think so much about it. Of course, there's rules and regulations, like we also don't have alcohol, to my great regret, but that's how it is. We don't want to call problems upon us. But all the other interventions that we do, like community work, we were talking a lot about community earlier, Sheila and me. It comes out of what we feel like doing. So, for example, we have something called the Museum of Ordinary Objects, which is basically pedestalizing ordinary objects into a museum space. So in our black box space, we put spotlights onto keys or onto a glass of water. And then next to it, you can either read just a word, or you can read a little story, or you can read whatever people feel like giving away while also giving the object. And that's a community-driven exercise. So people, from whoever interacts with Harkat, can come by, and then you realize that it's the everyday that is of value, and not everything has to be so overthought. Yeah.
I'm going to open it up in a second. Madhu, she talked about volatility in the Warsaw space. Avid has been doing stuff in Dubai, which is far more, everything is organized, everything has a 10-year plan, everything is sort of, literally marked in a way. What's the difference? What do you see the difference in what you've been doing in Dubai with Avid Learning and the Dubai art thing, and what you're doing here?
I think the huge difference is about the inspiration that we get in Dubai. They just opened a museum in the airport, the old defunct airport, and Nomad Museum. And, there is money. There is a lot of support from the government. And so they give boarding cards as you enter. And a whole cargo container has been converted into a museum storage space, and it is gilded. So there is a lot of razzmatazz there. But next year, Art Abu Dhabi is getting converted into Freeze Art, Freeze Abu Dhabi. So there's a lot of forward thinking, which I feel in Mumbai that is lacking a bit, because we don't have that support. And also, you don't have that kind of money and forward thinking. So whilst here we are doing a lot of programs, and we've done 1,900 programs, and we do 5 or 6 programs a month. But in Dubai, I think that kind of a thing is not there, because people are so there's so much else happening that to come to such programs is a little difficult for them.
Can I interject? Yeah, I would like to interject here, because sustainability and basically planning ahead is, I feel, difficult in Mumbai, but especially in the arts. And of course, there's venture capitalists, so we can ask for money, we can go around with a begging bowl, there's lots of things. We can sit on the street and proclaim our art and see what happens. But I feel the core here is that you're sustainable within yourself and also make yourself independent of the arts. At least that's the model we follow. We make art, but we're completely independent of the arts. We earn our money somewhere else. Like Tata, is the best example. They make steel and then a theater.
They also make steel. That
also
was their brand.
And some other things by now, but these things are completely not related. If the theater burns down, the steel factory will still exist. And if the steel market goes down, maybe they find a way of making money with the theater. So you have to, I think the Quorum example is maybe the only sustainable example over here, because there's this thought of commodifying art, but also making it viable. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, where you want to not commodify the art because you don't want to downplay it. Like craft is an art form, so you don't want to downplay it. But also in the end, if you wanted to survive, you have to come up with a plan. And that's lacking, I think, in a lot of spaces all over the world.
To answer what you said, do you have to be mad?
Yes.
Everything that works, like she's talking about, works at a community level, small, where you can get away with whatever gray areas of rules there are, because the community is covering for it. The minute you go past that community, like Quorum is, or anything big is, like your festival is, you can't do that. That's where you need the authorities, the government, etc., to support. And that's what doesn't happen.
Not so much support, but you certainly have to navigate. I'm going to just open it up and get Sadhana to just give an example of, take a mic off BIC, and then I will come to you in a second. And like we said, commodification of art. Is there a reason to relook at spaces? Let's have some of these conversations continuing.
I'm just going to say this because it's a story of hope. And with all apologies to the panelists, I'm not from Mumbai, so this may really not apply to this geography. I'm from Bangalore, and there is a beautiful center called the Bangalore International Center. I joined 8 years back. The center had a one-time grant from the movers and shakers of the city, Azim Premji Foundation, Wipro, Nanda Nilekani. I'm not corporate, so I don't have the entire list of names. One-time grant was given on the basis of a programming kernel that ran previously when it was incubated at TERI. The brief given to us in a program committee was, we've got this one-time grant, and we now need to be self-sustaining. The building, we moved into a new building. The funds were raised totally by the core committee. It was 28 crores. This was put into a corpus, and we lived off the interest. My reason of joining was very much the same, that I did not want to compromise on the harmonium artist by paying him 3,000. I wanted to give him his market rate. The programming kernel rested on two principles. The area, BIC had about 7-8 areas. Each of the areas was hired out. And the program committee's response was to see that we don't let it become just a convention center. So if the programming went into the auditorium, we had to be innovative and come up with something on the terrace, come up with something on the gallery. The limited point I'm making, yes, we got a one-time grant, which totaled up to 28 crores. After that, as I left the program committee after 8 years, I don't know the math, but we left a very, very healthy corpus for the community. In addition to that, all our programs have to be free because the land given to BIC is from the government, it's free. So all our programs had to be free. But we've left a healthy corpus. I just thought it's a story.
But they have a bar and a restaurant.
We have a bar and a restaurant.
Go
I
ahead.
just want to offer a very small perspective from an artist. I'm a singer, Sufi singer, spiritual singer. I gave up my software career and a very cushy job, let's say, with salary coming in every month. And then took up, like when you said, do you have to be crazy to be an artist, or do you have to think differently? The answer is, if we really sit down to think, the math doesn't even work even for an artist like me, because my source of income is coming from somewhere else. But like she said, if my source of income always comes from somewhere else and not my art, then how do I do justice with it? Because I have to spend a good 8 hours of my life in music. And if I have to get money from somewhere else, I have to be either a Khandani Rais, have some property, or a rich father or a rich husband, etc. Or I have to do some other job. I was doing a day job for nearly 10 years as a software professional. And that used to feed my musical income. That's because I'm not doing Bollywood music or popular genre. So being a part of this whole creative economy, the artist is also having a similar question as what is posed here. And I think the answer is, yes, they are coming in from business houses like the Ruiyas and Ambanis and NCPA, and we thank them for that. But a lot more has to be...
Okay, so how do we make the arts economy work? Or for artists?
No, so I think basically somebody has to pay the bills. And I think we've got to go back to the commercial model. I'm just saying, when I came into the NCP, I was a bit gobsmacked because I came from Book My Show, where we were purely for commerce. And we make money either from tickets or from sponsorship or from food and beverage, which is once you get them in, then you just loot them in whatever way you can, but you make money to pay the bills. And I think it's no different in running a center like the NCPA. We have a lot of conditions on us because our land was given free for 99 years, so we can't do anything which is non-artistic. But I think the principle of, 3 parts, where you get a third from box office, a third from sponsorship and benevolence, and another third from all ancillary kind of stuff like food, beverage, you run a museum shop, or blah, 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 etc., can make the model sustainable. I think there'll always be instances where some ridiculous artist...
But how will the artist help? How will we help the artist?
No, so I'm just saying that depending on who you program, all these 3 parts will then make sure. So I'm saying tomorrow if I have somebody who I can charge the top of the house, $200 versus, $50 that I'd normally charge, then you...
So can you do Shadi? It's artistic today.
Well, yeah.
It's craft, it's art, it's performance.
Unfortunately, we've not been able to get past that gate.
Srila, how do we help the craftsperson, the artist, the person at the center of all of this?
The first thing you do is find a government that believes in the culture of the...
Now you're saying God should come, God will come down, God will...
And to ask them to do one thing, to just give spaces, to make sure that you have rules for spaces that are then... Sorry? Yeah, so you get public spaces that are not usable. You have laws that are allow things to happen and not stop things from happening. You get more and more people involved, more and more sponsors, understanding that everything doesn't have to translate into how many people buy my product, but I need to do this because there is a greater good. And when all of that happens and it succeeds, then the performer gets money, the venue gets money, the sponsor will also eventually get money.
The old airport in Bombay, by the way, is it reused for some crafty, artsy thing?
There's no old airport.
It's the same runway that...
Terminal 1, Terminal 2, both in use.
No, meaning the one in Juhu.
That shut down.
Is that private?
Private for whom?
It's a flying school now.
Okay. And there can't be an argument to use that. I remember we used it 20 years ago for some festival. Exploration. Tell us, Brinda, about... I'll come to you.
There really is no space. In Mumbai, at least, there is.
No, how do we create money for artists?
So, we beg.
That they're doing. I mean, like he said, let's have course.
Let's go back to begging. You have to be a good salesperson. And though Srila said that the government should, I agree the government should, but they don't. And on the other hand, I think our festival, the Kalagoda Arts Festival, has survived because the government has never helped us, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I totally agree. We keep saying government should. I said keep government out of it. Let them get on with whatever else they're doing. They do it incompetently anyway.
But having said that, I must say the government now is very helpful with permissions. I remember once you told me that permissions in Mumbai, impossible. And I must say, I think we've managed it quite well now, and they're quite, they're quite cooperative. They're kind of.
I hope you know that ever since the Prime Minister said that the concert economy and the arts economy is now something that every government has to focus on, it's a whole different being.
I also want to tell everyone, because this question is not going to come to me, I know, but Srila did this festival, the Kalagoda festival, before me, and she raised the bar so high, even money-wise, she kind of raised it so high that we were told when it came to me by default. I didn't really want to do it, but then, yes. It was a challenge because our sponsors said, you can't do it like her. So I said, oh my God, this is something, I need to. But it's okay. We did well. We all did well.
What she's saying is you can't do it like her, but I was also told I must have made a lot of money. So it works both ways. It's a nightmare.
Yeah. I'll come back to you. I just want to go there and I'll come back to you. Madhu, how can we help artists?
I think the corporates have to get together because we have also a lot of responsibility. But
this bhigi billi type clapping ain't going to get any money, guys. Come on.
But in India, the problem is there are so many artists. How do you help all of them?
Well, you create the commerce platform for the artist.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's what I was going to say. I think you make economic sense out of it, and by doing more events with economic sense, you're able to, we do now 85 events a month across 5 locations. Yeah. And I think we lose money on an overall basis, but we make it elsewhere from a positioning perspective what we do. But I think the more we do it and the more we figure it out, and my first goal is to make it cost neutral before we try and make money. But in doing so, we pay artists market value and market price for what they do. And I think more people who do this, and but it's, I want to say we're democratizing it, not commoditizing it, but at a certain segment. I do agree that we are playing at a certain segment, and they can coexist. It's not mutually exclusive. But I think more people doing this will create more opportunities for artists, and I think that's what we have to do.
But we need to re-look at the model. I'll give you an example. In Varanasi, I think we charge for delegates, about 1 lakh and something per delegate, but the festival is free for everybody. The Jaipur Literature Festival, you can pay 100 rupee to get in now for 5 days, or you can pay what is the amount? Anybody knows? I think 13 or 14,000. How much? 15,000 per day. So that subsidizes the other stuff. And it's been working. I mean, we as an organization now learn to make money after 2 decades of not making money, or 2.5 decades of not making money. Now we have no choice, because we say that we have to make sure that every festival of ours does make money and artists do get paid at the rate that they should get paid, and not we're doing you a favor by giving you a platform. Michelle.
Yeah, I think everything has been said. I just wanted to add one more point. Being an artist, working with the arts, and also having an art space, I would also put the onus on the artist a little bit. So you have to think about, of course, it's beautiful if you can do theater and you can sing and you can move audiences, but what else can you add in value? Like, actually, an intern of ours had this brilliant idea. She's an actor, so she was like, how can I make more money? And then she started doing very simple, everyday workshops of what you need to learn as an actor, like voice projection or like movement exercises. Every day, the same rigor. People come, people don't come. She's doing it in the space, so we gave her the space for free. And then people, I don't know what her economics were of people paying, but it didn't hamper her craft because she was actually doing something for herself. She was working with her voice and with her body for herself. But she also helped the other people in the room because she was sort of leading the session. So it was for herself, she was earning money, and she was adding to the community. And also, if you do this in the long run, eventually you build a brand. And that's a brand beyond you being a great singer or a great actor, but that's a brand of what you stand for. And so there has to be a little bit of onus on the artists as well. I observed this a lot in the West, where people are like, great, government should pay us because, hey, we are adding to
It's a lifestyle choice. You were saying something? Otherwise,
yeah. So in Dubai, what we are doing is we've started a new initiative called Avid Creative Roundtables. And every month we have about 5 or 6 creative people. So they network amongst themselves. And also we put them in our roster. And whenever we get an opportunity, we introduce them to important festivals. Like we just did a big workshop with Dubai Design Week, where 1.5 lakh people came. And Avid presented Living Pigments. This was a sustainability workshop. And we didn't take any money from it, but we gave it to the person who was training. So that is the way we can,
Fabulous. Go ahead. Sudhir, Sudhir and then Mudit. And then we'll end.
I think I want to reiterate a few points. 40 years ago, when I started my life here in Bombay, the NCPA at the time was this biggest art establishment one could have ever seen in my life. I'd never seen anything like that. Went to the Pichli
East of the Suez, it was the biggest.
It was really large, right?
Yeah.
As a software engineer, if I were one, there was no such space. A few years later, the concept of the software technology parks of India came up, which gave access to brains of our Indian engineers to not just go straight from IIT to a shop floor in Larsen and Toubro for 8,000 rupees. You used to get 2,000 bucks. That's it. All engineers came out of IITs and went there. Or you went to the US to work because it was not good enough. This is 40 years ago, not too long ago. But fast forward, We are now 1 out of 4 engineers of the world sit here in every single category, whether it's fabless design, whether it's aerospace engineering, whether it is for pharmaceuticals, name it, right? We're 6 million of us. It's a $250 billion business today. If you really want to embrace the economy, then all artisans, all craftisans must think of themselves equally like that, made to measure to that level, right? Now, I think what you guys have been doing, I've been attending all the 6 years, is fantastic. But is there a NASSCOM equivalent that really takes 1 million artisans and their tradability, right? So we're actually using language now that they might not want to embrace that. And not every software engineer loves the word commerce either. They love sitting in their little cubicles and doing coding. And they can design very well. And they do design, whether it's the railways in Switzerland or in the US, etc., right? We're designing new drugs over here. We're designing everything over from here today. This design, innovation, these are the labs in India today. Most R&D of the Fortune 500 has moved to India. So why then, therefore, cannot the creative economy think similarly? And I would believe that what we're doing here in this forum right now needs to just expand. And there could be 1 million artisans to start with. Name them. Confirm them in a collective. Provide the leadership to them. They may not be necessarily in an organization. We were all then called coolies, by the way, sooner than later, not software engineers. But it's okay. We've changed the economic part of it. Everybody's talking about begging, CSR. That's not the way to treat ourselves. We're creative professionals. We're professionals, period. And let's just stand up for what we are. And if it needs leadership, it's you, Sanjoy, it's Asad, it's Sadhna, it's Madhuruya, it's Brinda, Srila. I think you are the exemplars of saying we did pursue a life in it and we made good deal with it. Now, it's highly exportable or it's marketable in India as well. But I think the NASSCOM equivalent for the creative industry, we can tag 1 million people in their work, might be the way.
Vivek, this one is for you because you have the energy, you're still young, or Michelle, and this is what we need to do. Mudit, last question and we can stop.
Your model is similar to the media industry, which is broken and they've sold themselves, but you have kept yourself pure. So that's credit to you. So the question was to raise funds. I see in Brinda's Kalagoda festival, there are a lot of stalls. So that's the way forward. And it's a very good festival, and I'm an admirer of NCPA too. So having more stalls, so revenue generated from that can fund the performance or the performer.
I just want to say one more thing. We are not using social media enough. So what we are starting in Avid Learning ME, which is Middle East, we are starting a program called Avid Creative Spotlight. So the artist also has to have something different in them. So we can, so then we can sort of project them and then people all across the world can see.
So to close, Asad, really what Sudhir said, if Avid can take on the leadership of the arts community, make 1 million members, they'll all fight with each other, we know that. But that apart, really lead this in a way that works. And to Mudit's answer, what's the festival? Jaipur Literature Festival. We get 11 crores in non-sponsorship revenue through khana, pina, stall, ticketing, blah, 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 blah. Non-sponsorship revenue is 11 crores in cash, not kind. Yeah. So thank you so much. We could have continued forever, but I think Aisha will throw a shoe at me if we take even one more question. So thank you all. Thank you, Avid Learning. Thank you to our wonderful panel. And thank you to the Avid team. Thank you.